Ma'am, this section is for family and distinguished guests only. The voice belonged to a young specialist no older than 20. His uniform was immaculate, his posture ramrod straight, but his eyes held the weary impatience of someone on a long, formal detail. He gestured vaguely with a starched glove toward a distant hill where a small crowd of the general public had gathered. Samantha didn't move. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat, simple bun, and her gaze remained fixed on the ceremony unfolding 100 yards away. She felt the familiar weight of a memory, a duty settling in her chest. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet but clear over the funereal quiet. "I'm here to pay my respects." The specialist's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of annoyance. He was following his orders. He had a list, a manifest of approved attendees, and this woman was not on it. He saw a civilian out of place among the constellation of generals and decorated veterans in their finest uniforms. "The public viewing area is over there," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He was about to turn away when Samantha held up her hand. In her palm lay a heavy bronze-colored coin, its edges worn smooth. He glanced at it, uncomprehending. It wasn't a standard unit coin, it was clearly custom, bearing the image of a helicopter overlaid with a Valkyrie's wing. He saw no name, no rank, just an unfamiliar crest. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. "Ma'am, I can't help you. Please move to the designated area." His dismissal was total. He had made his judgment, and in his mind, the matter was closed. But Samantha Morgan hadn't flown a crippled Blackhawk through a maelstrom of enemy fire by accepting the first no she was given. She stayed right where she was, her calm gaze a silent challenge to his certainty. The young specialist, Miller, felt a prickle of irritation. The woman wasn't shouting or making a scene, which was almost worse. Her quiet persistence was a disruption to the solemn, ordered atmosphere of the funeral. He squared his shoulders, puffing his chest out slightly, in a display of authority that felt more rehearsed than natural. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. This is a restricted area." "I'm aware of the restriction, specialist," Samantha said, her voice still infuriatingly level. She slid the challenge coin back into her pocket and retrieved a simple leather wallet. She produced her VA identification card and held it out. "Samantha Morgan." Miller took the card, his fingers barely brushing hers. He studied the photo, then the name. Morgan. It meant nothing to him. It wasn't on the list of cabinet secretaries, foreign dignitaries, or the Joint Chiefs. It wasn't on the family roster. He handed it back with a sigh that bordered on insubordination. "This doesn't change anything. You're not on the manifest." "Could you check with the family liaison? They're expecting me." "The family is in mourning," he snapped, his professionalism beginning to fray. "They aren't taking visitors right now. I have my orders." Sensing an impasse, a staff sergeant with a chest full of ribbons and the hardened look of a career NCO ambled over. "What's the problem here, Miller?" "This woman won't move." "Sergeant Davis," Miller said, grateful for the backup. "She's insisting on access to the main ceremony. She's not on the list." Sergeant Davis turned his practiced, intimidating gaze on Samantha. It was a look designed to quell unruly privates and put civilians in their place. He was a man who lived by regulations, who saw the world in black and white, in right and wrong, in authorized and unauthorized. He looked at her simple blue top, her plain slacks, her civilian purse. She didn't fit. "Let me see your ID," he commanded, his voice a low gravel. Samantha passed over her VA card again. Davis took it and scrutinized it far longer than necessary, tilting it in the light as if expecting the lettering to dissolve. "Morgan," he muttered, tasting the name. "Don't know it. You serve with the general." "I did," Samantha replied. Davis's eyes narrowed. In what capacity? The question was an interrogation. He was testing her, looking for a lie. I was a pilot. A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. A pilot? Right. Look, ma'am, a lot of people feel like they knew the general. He was a great man. But today is for the people who really knew him, his family, his command staff. We can't just let everyone who shook his hand once wander in. The condescension was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. A few mourners, colonels, and sergeants, major in their dress blues and greens, began to slow as they passed, their curiosity piqued by the quiet confrontation. The scene was becoming a small island of discord in an ocean of grief. "Sergeant, I'm not just someone who shook his hand," Samantha said, her composure a shield. "I need to be here." "Everyone needs to be here," Davis retorted, his voice rising. He was enjoying the small audience, the chance to be the gatekeeper, the enforcer. He tapped a finger on his radio. "Look, I can make this easy, or I can make it hard. You can walk over to the public hill, or I can call the MPs and have them escort you off post. Your choice." The threat was blatant. He was using the weight of the entire United States Army to move one woman a few hundred feet. He saw her as a nuisance, perhaps a deluded fan, or worse, someone trying to steal a little of the general's reflected glory. He saw everything but the truth. He gestured to the worn leather satchel hanging from her shoulder. "You're not authorized military insignia on civilian attire anyway." He was reaching now, misquoting a regulation he only half remembered, but it sounded official enough. He was building his case not for his report, but for the onlookers. He needed them to see him as the reasonable one. His eyes fell on a small circular patch stitched onto the bag's flap. It was faded, the colors leached out by a sun much harsher than Virginia's. It depicted a helicopter within a stylized cross, the symbol for Aero Medical Evacuation, a dust-off patch. To Sergeant Davis, it was just another piece of unauthorized flair, a prop in this woman's story. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "Some kind of fan club patch?" As he spoke, the world around Samantha seemed to dissolve. The muted gray of Arlington vanished, replaced by the blinding sun-bleached landscape of Kandahar province. The scent of damp earth and cut grass was gone. Overwhelmed by the memory smell of hot hydraulic fluid, acrid cordite, and the metallic tang of blood, the patch on her bag was no longer just a piece of embroidered cloth. It was a portal. She was back in the belly of her Blackhawk, the vibrations of the rotors a familiar heartbeat in her bones. She felt the lurch as the bird touched down in a storm of brown dust, the ramp slamming down before the skids had even fully settled. She heard the frantic, desperate shouts of the ground team as they loaded a litter. The soldier on it, pale and still, his arm draped over the side, bore the 2nd Infantry Division patch, General Wallace's unit. Through the chaos, she heard the calm, reassuring voice of her pilot in command, a man she'd trusted with her life 100 times over. His voice, cutting through the headset static and the roar of the engines, was a lifeline. "We're not leaving anyone behind, Morgan. Load him up." The memory was less than a second long, a flash of sensory overload. But it was more real than the self-important sergeant standing in front of her. That patch wasn't a decoration. It was a testament. It was a piece of her soul she'd left in the dust of a forgotten war. A war that Sergeant Davis, with his stateside ribbons and parade ground posture, couldn't possibly comprehend. She blinked, the green lawns of Arlington snapping back into focus. Her expression hadn't changed, but something inside her had hardened into pure, unyielding steel. Standing a short distance away, partially obscured by a magnificent old oak tree, was a man whose grief was etched into the lines on his face. Command Sergeant Major Reynolds, retired, was a monolith of military bearing, even in his dark civilian suit. He had served 30 years, 20 of them with General Wallace. They had come up together from the mud of a platoon live fire exercise to the sterile strategy rooms of the Pentagon. Wallace had been the officer, the leader, the visionary. Reynolds had been his fist, his conscience, and his oldest friend. He had noticed the disturbance at the perimeter. At first, he was annoyed. A funeral for a man like Wallace demanded absolute decorum, but as he watched, his annoyance turned to curiosity. The woman was unnaturally calm. He'd seen that kind of calm before. He'd seen it in young soldiers just before they kicked in a door, and in seasoned leaders when a plan was falling apart. It was the calm of someone who had been through the fire and knew with absolute certainty what they were capable of. He couldn't hear their words, but he could read the body language. The two guards posturing and aggressive, the woman still and centered. He took a few steps closer, his eyes scanning her for details. Plain clothes, unremarkable at first glance, but then he saw it. The bag, and on the bag, the patch. The faded dust off insignia hit him like a physical blow. His mind raced back a decade to a chaotic command tent, filled with radio static and the smell of stale coffee. He remembered General Wallace, then just a brigadier, pacing like a caged tiger, listening to the desperate calls from a reconnaissance team that had been ambushed and pinned down. They were taking casualties, running out of ammo, and air support was unavailable. It was a death sentence. Then a new voice had cut through the cacophony, a female pilot, calm, steady, almost serene. Her call sign was Valkyrie. She was flying a medevac mission nearby and had heard the pleas. Against direct orders to stay clear of the hot landing zone, she had announced her intention to go in. Reynolds remembered Wallace grabbing the handset, ordering her to stand down, telling her it was a suicide run, and he remembered her simple, chilling reply, "Sir, you have wounded, and I have room." Reynolds looked back at the woman being harangued by Sergeant Davis. He saw the blonde hair. He overheard Davis say her name, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Morgan. The name clicked into place with the call sign. Valkyrie, Samantha Morgan. A cold dread washed over the old command sergeant major. He felt a surge of protective fury so intense it made his hands tremble. They weren't just disrespecting a veteran. They were desecrating the memory of the very man they were supposed to be honoring. They were turning away one of the heroes of Wallace's own legend. He didn't hesitate. He turned his back on the scene, pulling out his cell phone as he walked briskly away from the cordon. His thumb flew across the screen, finding a number he hadn't called in years but had never deleted. It belonged to Major General Carmichael, currently serving as a director on the Joint Staff. Carmichael had been Wallace's executive officer back in Afghanistan. He would understand. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Carmichael, sir, it's CSM Reynolds, retired," he said, his voice low and urgent, the words clipped. "I'm at Arlington for Wallace's service. Sergeant Major, good to hear your voice, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I don't have time for pleasantries, sir." Reynolds cut in, his tone sharp. "There's a situation here at the main entrance to the ceremony. They're turning a woman away. Her name is Morgan, Samantha Morgan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Reynolds could almost hear the gears turning in the general's mind. "She has a dust-off patch on her bag, sir," Reynolds pressed, wanting to be sure. "The one from Kandahar, call sign Valkyrie." The silence that followed was heavy with dawning comprehension and horror. When Carmichael finally spoke, his voice was tight with suppressed rage. "Stay there, Sergeant Major. Don't let her leave. I'm on my way." The call ended. Reynolds slipped his phone back into his pocket. He turned and watched the two guards, who had now been joined by a first sergeant, escalating their harassment. He didn't intervene directly. It wasn't his place anymore, but he stood his ground, a silent, watchful sentinel. The cavalry was on its way. Inside a secure office in the Pentagon's E-ring, Major General Carmichael slammed his phone down on his desk with enough force to make his aide jump. "Get me the service record for a Chief Warrant Officer, Samantha Morgan," he barked, his face a thunderous mask. "Call sign Valkyrie now." The aide, a young but highly efficient captain, didn't ask questions. He knew that tone of voice. It was the sound of a crisis unfolding. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the Army's personnel database. "Morgan, Samantha, here she is, sir. Warrant Officer, Aviation Branch. Cross-reference her deployment history with General Wallace's command. OEF 2010 to 2012, Carmichael ordered, already shrugging on his service coat. The captain's eyes widened as he scrolled through the file. It was page after page of commendations, flight records, and after-action reports. "Sir, my God! Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Star, multiple air medals, most with the V device for valor." He paused, reading from a citation on the screen. His voice hushed with awe. October 12, 2011. While under intense and accurate enemy fire, then CW-2 Morgan repeatedly maneuvered her aircraft into a contested landing zone to evacuate 17 critically wounded soldiers. Despite catastrophic damage to her helicopter's tail rotor and windscreen, with her co-pilot incapacitated, she successfully recovered all casualties and flew the crippled aircraft back to base. "Sir, the recommending officer for the DSC was Brigadier General Wallace." Carmichael's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle pulsed beneath his skin. "He didn't just recommend her, Captain. He told me that if the President ever asked him to name the single bravest soldier he ever served with, he would say her name without hesitation." He snatched his service cap from its stand. "Get me a car. Inform General Peterson's staff we are coming to them. Code 3. Tell them Valkyrie is at the gate and the old guard is turning her away." Back at the funeral, Sergeant Davis and Specialist Miller had been joined by their NCOIC, a first sergeant whose perfectly pressed uniform and air of weary authority signaled the end of any negotiation. He hadn't asked for Samantha's story. He had only been told there was a disruption. His job was to end it. "Ma'am," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth, "you have been repeatedly asked to relocate to the public viewing area. You have refused. You are now causing a disturbance at a state funeral." He took a deliberate step closer, invading her personal space. "I am giving you one final instruction. You will leave this area immediately. If you fail to comply, I will have the military police escort you from this installation. You will be cited for trespassing." "And given this," he said, pointing a contemptuous finger at the patch on her bag, "you may also face charges for the fraudulent wear of military insignia. Do you understand me?" It was the ultimate overreach, the final unforgivable insult. To be accused of being a fraud, a liar, a thief of valor here at the funeral of the man who owed her his life and the lives of his men. A flicker of something hot and dangerous sparked in Samantha's eyes, but her voice, when she spoke, was as cold and quiet as the grave markers surrounding them. "I understand what you're saying, First Sergeant," she said, "but you don't understand who you're talking to." Before the first sergeant could respond with another threat, the low hum of approaching vehicles cut through the air. A trio of black government sedans, their lights off but their purpose clear, pulled up silently along the service road behind the cordon. The guards turned, their annoyance momentarily forgotten, replaced by confusion. The doors of the lead sedan opened and Major General Carmichael emerged, his movements sharp and angry. He was followed by his aide and a female full-bird colonel, but it was the man who emerged from the second car who made the blood drain from the faces of the 3 guards. General Peterson, a 4-star, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stepped out of the vehicle. He was supposed to be delivering the eulogy. Instead, he was here on the perimeter, and his face was a mask of cold fury. The First Sergeant Davis and Miller snapped to attention so fast it was almost comical, their bodies rigid with shock and fear. The procession of high-ranking officers moved with a singular purpose. General Peterson walked straight past the petrified guards as if they were nothing more than lawn ornaments. He didn't slow, didn't even glance at them until he was standing directly in front of Samantha Morgan. The air crackled with tension. The nearby mourners had all stopped, their attention fully captivated by the unfolding drama. General Peterson looked at Samantha, his stern expression softening into one of profound respect and deep regret. He didn't say a word. Instead, he brought his right hand up in a salute so crisp, so perfect it could have been captured in a training manual. It was a gesture of deference, of honor, from one of the most powerful military officers in the world to the unassuming woman in the blue top. Instinctively, Major General Carmichael, the colonel, and every other uniformed person within sight followed their leader's example. A wave of salutes rippled through the crowd, a silent, powerful tribute that washed over the scene and left the three guards standing alone in their ignorance. After a long moment, General Peterson lowered his hand. "Chief Morgan," he said, his voice deep and resonant, filled with an emotion that stunned the onlookers. "It is an honor to see you. General Wallace, he spoke of you often. He once told me that if it weren't for Valkyrie, he'd have come home from Kandahar 10 years earlier, under a flag." He turned not just to the guards, but to the entire assembly, his voice rising with command authority, ensuring everyone could hear. "For those of you who do not know this woman, allow me to introduce you to a living legend. This is Chief Warrant Officer 4 Samantha Morgan, retired. On the night of October 12, 2011, in the Arghandab Valley, a place most of us pray we never have to see, then CW2 Morgan flew her medevac helicopter, call sign Dustoff 71, into the very mouth of hell." He paused, letting the words sink in. The silence was absolute. A company of Rangers from then Brigadier General Wallace's command was surrounded, taking heavy casualties and about to be overrun. Air support was denied due to the extreme risk. It was a death sentence, but Chief Morgan, hearing their calls on the guard channel, disregarded a direct order to remain clear of the area. With her aircraft taking sustained machine gun and RPG fire, with her co-pilot grievously wounded and her tail rotor shredded, she did not land once, not twice, but 3 times in that kill zone. 3 times she flew into the heart of the fire. She personally pulled wounded men onto her bird, while her crew chief laid down suppressing fire. She saved 17 men that night. 17 sons, husbands, and fathers came home because this woman refused to leave them behind. He let his gaze sweep over the crowd, over the generals and the privates, the politicians, and the families. General Wallace is being buried here today because he lived to complete a 30-year career. He lived to see his grandchildren. He lived because of the actions of this woman. The hero of that day is not the man we are mourning. As great as he was, the hero of that day is standing right here. General Peterson then turned his glacial stare upon the 3 guards. The first sergeant seemed to shrink inside his uniform. "First Sergeant," the general's voice was low and menacing, "you and your men will be in my office at the Pentagon at 1600 hours. You will explain to me in excruciating detail how your men managed to fail on every conceivable level. You failed to verify. You failed to de-escalate. You failed to use common sense. But your most profound failure was one of imagination. You failed to see the soldier standing in front of you. You saw a woman in a blue shirt and you made an assumption. That assumption, First Sergeant, that casual, unthinking bias is a cancer. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wear, and to the memory of the man you are supposed to be honoring." The first sergeant opened his mouth, a stammered apology forming on his lips, but the general cut him off with a sharp chop of his hand. He turned back to Samantha, his expression softening once more. "Chief, what would you have them learn from this? What should I tell them?" All eyes were on Samantha. She stood with a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her. She looked not at the general, but at the pale, terrified face of young Specialist Miller. "General," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "the standards are the standards for a reason. They keep us alive. They ensure the mission gets done. They don't have a gender. They don't care what you look like. The problem is never the standard itself. The problem is when we decide in our own minds who we're going to apply it to. Don't soften the standards. Just apply them fairly to everyone. That's all." As she spoke the word standards, her mind flashed back one last time, not to the dust and chaos, but to the quiet intensity of her cockpit in the moments before that final landing. The master caution panel was lit up like a Christmas tree. Screaming alarms filled the headset, and the aircraft was shaking itself apart. Through the spiderweb of cracks in the armored windscreen, she could see the flickering muzzle flashes from the tree line. It was an impossible situation. She heard General Wallace's voice, raw with desperation, crackling over the radio. "Valkyrie, you cannot land here. We are taking effective fire. I am ordering you to abort." And she heard her own voice, a stranger's voice, impossibly calm, cutting through her own fear. "Roger that, sir, but you have wounded and I have room. I'm coming in hot." That was the standard, not the one written in a regulation book, but the one written on her heart. You don't leave anyone behind, ever, and you apply it to everyone, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed General Wallace's funeral, a quiet but significant shift occurred within the military district of Washington. A comprehensive update to the standard operating procedures for all ceremonial guards was issued with a new emphasis on de-escalation and professional verification. A mandatory training module on unconscious bias, featuring a heavily redacted after-action report of the incident at Arlington, was rolled out across the command. First Sergeant Davis was quietly reassigned to a training billet in the middle of nowhere, a place where his career could fade into obscurity. One Saturday afternoon, Samantha was in the commissary on Fort Myer, her shopping cart half full, debating between two brands of coffee. She was just another shopper, a woman in a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt, completely anonymous. "Ma'am," she turned. It was Specialist Miller, the young guard from the funeral. He was in civilian clothes and looked even younger without his crisp uniform. He stood awkwardly twisting the handle of his shopping basket, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "Ma'am, Chief," he stammered, finally looking up. His face was flushed with shame. I just wanted to find you to apologize properly. There's no excuse for how I acted, for what I said. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Samantha studied him for a long moment. She saw no malice in his eyes, only a profound and genuine regret. She saw a young soldier who had made a mistake and had been forced to learn a hard public lesson. She offered a small, tired sigh. "You're young, Specialist," she said, her voice gentle. "You've got a long career ahead of you if you want it. You learned something that day. A lot of people go their whole lives without learning it. Don't waste the lesson." He looked at her, his expression pleading, wanting absolution. She gave him something better. She gave him his marching orders. "See the soldier, Miller," she said, "not the package they come in. See the soldier first, every time, that's all." She gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of closure. Then she turned back to the coffee, leaving him standing in the aisle with his lesson and a future he now had to earn. The courage of veterans like Samantha Morgan defines the very best of our nation. To honor their service and hear more stories of incredible women in uniform, like and subscribe to She's Valor.